The fantasy football playoffs are officially here, Jason, and we got you covered. If you're there, you're going to be ready to go. The Fantasy GOAT starts right now.
This is the Fantasy GOAT, sponsored by Casablanca Resort and Casino, like Vegas used to be.
Welcome, kids, to the Fantasy GOAT. Congratulations if you're in the fantasy football playoffs. If you're not, well, there's always next year, Jason.
Always next year.
I'm in 4 leagues. 2 leagues I'm in the playoffs. 2 leagues I'm not. One of them, both of them that I'm not in are in both of your leagues.
Yeah, and 2 of the leagues that I'm commissioner of, I didn't even make the playoffs. So it's an interesting year, but I'm in enough leagues where I made the playoffs to make it interesting.
Yes.
So I'm excited.
It's part of what makes fantasy football great is, the triumph and also those hard times. But let's move on to livestock right now, kids. So first thing, big issues when it comes to QBs as the fantasy playoffs are starting. Justin Herbert and CJ Stroud, 2 guys, hard weeks for them. Herbert's out for the year. Stroud is dealing with the concussion. But for a lot of players and managers who are, holding on to the playoffs, Stroud is a guy I'm really dependent on. So it's been this theme throughout the entire season. Quarterbacks being injured and backup QBs playing. It's a crazy, crazy time. And producer James Edward Barrickman IV has a lot of insight we can learn from just how crazy this nonsense is when it comes to backup QBs. James?
Yeah, so just add them to the list. Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, out they go. In come Easton Stick and potentially Davis Mills. Just another couple casualties in what's been a really, really just wild year for quarterback injuries in pro football. Take a look at this list of potential starting quarterbacks for this upcoming week. In Cincinnati, you got Jake Browning. Cleveland, Joe Flacco. Houston, Davis Mills, potentially.
Wow.
Indianapolis, Gardner Minshew. LA, Easton Stick. Minnesota, Nick Mullins. New England, Bailey Zappi. New York, Tommy DeVito. The other team in New York, Zach Wilson. Pittsburgh, Mitch Trubisky. And potentially in Seattle, Drew Lock. If those numbers hold, it would be 11 backups getting the start this week. 8 of those in the AFC, and 5 of those AFC teams on the playoff race. So it's just been wild and an unprecedented number if it holds. That's not even including Will Levis or Aiden O'Connell.
Who are basically backups as well.
Exactly. So if you're in the fantasy playoffs and you have a healthy, fantasy-relevant quarterback, you should be thanking your lucky stars, because that's also not mentioning how that affects the other fantasy studs on those offenses.
Exactly.
So keep an eye out for that situation in Seattle, in Houston. We don't know who's going to be playing, whether it's going to be CJ Stroud, Davis Mills, Geno Smith, or Drew Lock. So we'll see.
Yeah. Thank God I have a bye in the league that I have CJ Stroud in, because I can wait a week for him to recover.
Yeah, and Tyreek Hill I have is my bye week. So he's, of course, also recovering with the ankle. So.
And it's amazing that he even came back in that game, which is freaky.
These are the guys you want to draft.
Exactly.
They're not the ones that get a little nick on their finger and they're out for the
that would be me. Paper cut. Paper cut, I'm out for a few weeks.
Lion.
All right, next up, let's talk about this. So obviously, as we're heading into the first round of the fantasy playoffs, I always think it's fascinating to really dissect the teams that are in the playoffs and what players are on those rosters. So, Jason, some of the guys who are on these teams, if you're in the fantasy playoffs, the names that kept coming up the most, that are the most prevalent names: Keenan Allen, Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey, Josh Allen, Kamara, Mostert, Etienne, and Hawkinson. So a lot of those are the names of the players on teams that really made their way into the fantasy playoffs.
And it seems like that's the case every year. They call them league winners, right? And every year, without exception. And if you have one or think about having 2 on one team. How glorious that would be. You probably have a bye week. Also, you know what? It's always, I don't know if this happens to other people, but when I do get fortunate to get a bye week and my players go off that week, aren't you like, no, wait,
Exactly.
And then you hope that they didn't use it all.
The funny thing is I've never seen your face look more elated than when you contemplated the thought of having 2 league winners on your... I've never seen you look that elated, Jason. Lastly, let's do this. I mean, the most viral moment going on this week, of course, it's Tommy DeVito's agent, Sean Stellato. I mean, does this guy look like Rocky Balboa or...
He does.
I mean, Sinatra with the fedora and the pinstripe suit. This guy...
Kissing the father.
Listen, I love the whole thing. He actually owns, I heard this, 30 handmade custom suits. So, I mean, custom suits, the Stellato guy. But, I mean, let's talk about DeVito for a second, beyond just the agent.
Yeah.
Undrafted rookie from Illinois and Syracuse, right? He grew up in Jersey, went to Don Bosco Prep, which is, very New Jersey. He's from Livingston, New Jersey. But it's just amazing what this guy is accomplishing. And that game-winning drive over Green Bay is a great moment for him. But maybe the best thing ever, DeVito still lives at home with his mom, and his mom makes his bed. Yeah. That's actually
Cooks
a fact.
And does his laundry. Yeah, it's a great story. And if anything, if you're sick of the Taylor Swift sidebar, this one might be a nice, replacement to it.
It's the New Jersey version. Can we?
It's the Tommy version.
Yeah,
right?
Tommy. I think Tommy Cutlets or the DeVito Cutlets. They're calling them. I just want to do a Brando Godfather. You got to get the mouth with the cotton.
You have to put stuff in your mouth.
My daughter's wedding.
Maybe the Godfather's distant cousin.
Something like that. Yeah. The not so good version of the Godfather. Guys, listen, that is just a little bit of what we're breaking down on today's show. We're getting you ready. We promise for those fantasy playoffs. I'm big on Matthew Stafford, and we're going to be talking about that coming up in GOAT Vision. Stick with us.
Before we head to break, in Week 15 of 2004, which Tennessee quarterback threw for 492 yards and accounted for 5 total touchdowns in a loss versus Oakland? He totaled 37.8 fantasy points and finished as the week's QB1. The answer after the break. Welcome back. Before the break, we asked you in Week 15 of 2004, which Tennessee quarterback threw for 492 yards and accounted for 5 total touchdowns in a loss versus Oakland. The answer, quarterback Billy Volek, who played for Tennessee from 2001 to 2005.
Welcome back to the Fantasy GOAT. Okay, so before we dive into GOAT Vision, let's talk a little bit about the hole-in-one player of the week. And Jason, it is none other than Deebo Samuel. This guy had 7 receptions, 149 yards, a touchdown through the air, a touchdown on the ground. He had 30.5 fantasy points. Last week even, he had 33.8 fantasy points. He's now wide receiver 13 through week 14. This guy is such a weapon when he's healthy, and we see him being a major factor for not only Brock Purdy, but this whole San Francisco team.
I don't have him, and I don't want to play against him. That's all I can tell you about Deebo.
I got him in one league. He's had 5 touchdowns over the last 2 games. He's really such a dual threat, whether through the air or on the ground. But now let's head into GOAT Vision. So, Jason, like I was telling you, Matthew Stafford, I wasn't feeling him leading in to week 14, but this guy played well in rainy conditions against a Baltimore defense that's a really tough group. And he had 294 yards, 3 touchdowns, obviously benefited from Cooper Kupp having a great game. But I really like him going into week 15 in this first week of the playoffs as he's facing the worst pass defense in the league, Washington. So I really like him. They gave up 45 points in consecutive games at one point this season. So Stafford is a guy I'm liking a lot in this critical week.
Tell me who you're down on, because I'm going to do mine at the same time.
Down Tua, and I played him over Lamar in a league. It was his worst game of the season, an awful game against Tennessee. 0 TDs, 2 turnovers, 14-point lead they blow in the last 3 minutes. He's facing a tough New York D that's giving up the 5th fewest points to QB, so I'm out on Tua. I can't rely on him. Even though that firepower's there, I'm not relying on him.
I also have a league where I have Tua and Lamar, and I know a bunch of people that have, for some reason, the way the draft must have unfolded is you had an opportunity to get both of them. I always choose the wrong one. If I play Lamar, he's the one that has the bad week, so I can't.
I feel so bad. I feel like Sean Stellato took me into a back alley and beat me up.
All right, so Matt Stafford's a good example for what I'm about to ask you. My pro and con are something I need your advice on.
Okay.
So the guy I really like, and this goes all the way back to Washington, University of Washington is Jake Browning.
Yeah.
Guy is on fire. He's throwing. He's chucking the ball. I do like him a lot. I have him in a league with Patrick Mahomes, who's on my down list.
Yeah.
I'm annoyed with Patrick Mahomes, not just because of his play, but I always give a shorter leash to the guys that seem to spend more time off the field than on the field with commercials and going and doing these events like the World Series instead of maybe focusing on your own job.
Right.
And podcasts like the Manning Cast. So I'm not happy with him right now. That said, do I start Browning over Mahomes in a do-or-die playoff situation?
Honestly, and this might not be the right answer, but just imagine you don't play Mahomes in the first week of the playoffs. You're going to be kicking yourself because it's like Mahomes or Jake Browning, you know?
Right,
so, I mean, also, I do think I've never seen Mahomes that revved up after that poor call. You know, was it poor, was it not? Whatever. Anyway, the circumstances, he was revved up against that Buffalo team at the end, and
so you think he'll take it out on
I think he's gonna take it out on
I'll probably stick with him.
Okay, and who are you not feeling?
Well, Mahomes.
Mahomes.
Yeah.
Okay. So
but I'll still probably play him because it is Mahomes. And,
okay. There you go. Now let's move on to RBs right now for GOAT Vision. So I just feel like we have to give somebody their due. We don't talk about him enough on this show. Kyren Williams. I mean,
so good.
Talk about a league winner.
Yeah.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, if you have him on your team, he had 3 weeks ago 16 carries, 143 yards, 88 yards the week after that, and 114 last week against Baltimore. I mean, this guy is the definition of a league winner. I wish I had him.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm not going to start. I would not start this guy in the playoffs, but I'm getting really excited about Chase Brown from Cincinnati.
Yeah.
The only problem is he's not getting enough carries, so he's kind of in that Keaton Mitchell category where he could break one, but I'd rather still go with volume. That was my advice last week in the playoffs, is volume.
Yeah.
So Rachaad White would also be a guy that gets volume and is doing very well at the right time. And then you could choose either one of these guys as a con, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire, just come on. He's just ruining it for everybody.
Yeah, he's...
You know, nobody's playing him in fantasy, and he's getting carries because of Pacheco, and just come on.
Yeah, the Kansas City backfield, I try to stay away from that like the plague. But, I'm just not feeling Javonte Williams in Denver. He's finally got his first TD last week, but he's going against a tough Denver team that's only 3 fewer teams give up those fantasy points to running backs, and they've yet to even allow a touchdown through the air reception TD to a running back this year.
Yeah, I thought he would do better this season.
Versus Detroit. So I'm not feeling him against a tough Detroit defense. But that's what we're feeling right now for QBs, RBs, and GOAT Vision. After a short break, you got to make sure you stick with us. We got GOAT Vision. We're diving into wide receivers and tight ends.
Before we take another timeout, in Week 15 of 2002, which Atlanta tight end had 5 receptions, 75 yards, and 1 touchdown in a win versus Carolina? He scored 16 fantasy points and finished as the week's tight end 1. The answer after the break. Welcome back. Before the break, we asked you in Week 15 of 2002, which Atlanta tight end had 5 receptions, 75 yards, and 1 touchdown in a win versus Carolina. The answer, tight end Algie Crumpler, who played for Atlanta from 2001 to 2007.
Welcome back to the Fantasy GOAT. All right, Jason, I'm going to kick us off for GOAT Vision wide receivers. So I'm feeling DeAndre Hopkins. He's definitely feeling some synergy and gelling with rookie QB Will Levis. He had a great game last week, 7 catches, 124 yards, a touchdown. I like him again going up in this revenge game against his old team in Houston. So I like that a lot. The guy I'm not feeling, which is weird, DJ Moore. He's one of those league winner types of guys. He had 2 touchdowns last week, 1 through the air, 1 on the ground, but he's playing Cleveland, which ranks #1 overall against the pass. They're second in most difficult to actually allow points to fantasy wide receivers. So that matchup is going to be a tough one for DJ Moore in Cleveland. I don't like that so much. What about you?
Yeah, it's funny. Well, you dug deeper than me because I actually had DJ Moore on my high on list with Chicago, but that is a good point.
Yeah.
It's all about matchups too. So in that case, I just got to give props to Tyreek again. I mean, this is the type of guy I want on my team. You know, he looked like he was out, not only for the game, but for the season. And somehow he came back into that game and still caught some good catches.
He's a physical freak.
I just love having him on my team. There's been so many instances this year where, you know, you start a guy and you're like, oh, you know, he's kind of shaky because he's coming off of an injury, and boom, he's out right away. Darren Waller. And then for who I'm not really down on because everybody predicted it. Hard to believe it's week 15 and the G-men still don't have a wide receiver that stands out. They had a good game. Some of them had a good game, like Robinson last game, but still nobody's getting enough targets. And Tommy DeVito is running all over the place, so that takes away a lot of targets. So still, after week 15, they don't really have a guy that you would want.
That cutlet needs his sharp provolone and some roasted peppers, some broccoli rabe. He needs some assets on that sandwich. But let's move on to tight ends right now in GOAT Vision. I just want to say real quickly, I mean, David and Njoku, clap it up for this guy. He had a career game, 11 catches, scored twice for the first time in his career, 91 yards first time, second largest amount of yards he's ever had in his career. So Njoku had a great game, and Joe Flacco, you know, throwing him that ball there, which is nice. The guy I'm not feeling, I'm just not going to get fooled on Kyle Pitts, especially when it comes playoff time. Sure, he got in the end zone, looked a little better, but I'm not dependent on Kyle Pitts playoff time. That's just how I feel.
I have similar situations. So I'm high on Evan Ingram. I have him in a few leagues. We were all waiting for this to happen. He's peaking at the right time for Jacksonville, and it probably is helping him that Christian Kirk is out right now. So loving him at the right time. And just like, you know, you're talking about Kyle Pitts, same way, and I already kind of joked about it, but Darren Waller, you know, you're starting to hear people talk like, oh, he's coming back. I turn the radio off. That's how bad it is because I don't want to get suckered into that again.
Yeah, you're not putting.
I'm cutting him.
You're not putting your money on the line, even if he comes back.
Right.
Playoff time, guys. I mean, it is the playoffs, and that means we really need to know what's happening with injuries. After a short break, Dr. Nithin Natwa is helping us out on everything you need to know when it comes to injuries. All right, so Dr. Nithin Natwa at Fantasy Docs on TikTok and Instagram is with us as we're preparing for the fantasy playoffs, setting our lineup. So, Dr. Natwa, thanks for being with us. Let's start here. Justin Herbert out for the year. Tell us about that situation.
Justin Herbert ended up having a finger fracture, and they ended up doing surgery for it, which isn't super common with finger fractures. Usually, they're just able to splint it up, and it heals back fine. Doing surgery means that it was shifted significantly out of place, so they decided to pin it together. He should be able to recover fine next season. So for dynasty purposes, I definitely wouldn't be worried about this. But yeah, unfortunately for the rest of this season, he won't be relevant for fantasy purposes.
So Doc, even more quarterbacks going down. CJ Stroud in concussion protocol. What's the latest?
Once he's able to do sports-specific activity, then they'll put him into a live practice. That can all be done within the same week. And with it being the end of the season, I can't really predict, because the thing that they say about concussions is that every concussion is different. You just have to monitor his practices. As long as he's able to get out there for one practice, I would lean towards him playing, though.
And lastly, Dr. Natwa, I mean, obviously a lot of people took Justin Jefferson first overall. What is it like? Can he be a good factor on a playoff team right now?
Justin Jefferson has been very frustrating to a lot of fantasy owners, I'm sure, with the hamstring strain. Then he finally comes back and he takes this chest contusion. They ended up transporting him to the hospital. And the reason why they might do that is because when you take a huge chest hit and you feel a little bit shorter breath, they want to make sure that there isn't a collapsed lung. They can usually rule that out on an x-ray, which they do have facilities like that at the playing field. But occasionally the x-ray they have isn't the greatest definition. So if they're uncertain about it, then they'll transport him to the hospital to definitively rule out what we call a collapsed lung. Or if they're concerned that there might be multiple fractured ribs that aren't showing up, then they'll take him to the hospital. They'll get a CT scan, which definitively rules out those kind of fractures.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Nithin Natwa at Fantasy Docs on TikTok and Instagram. Thanks so much. Now, Jason, it's time for Sam with our GOATcast.
It is time for your Week 15 GOATcast, where we highlight all of the outdoor games so you can make some weather decisions for your lineup. And by far the wettest game this weekend, looking to be in Carolina. Divisional matchup against Atlanta, a soaker on Sunday. Miami will see the warmest game, no surprise, South Florida in December with 70s, but some wind in the mix for that game in South Florida. And then mild temperatures overall for really all of the games for mid-December. We could certainly be a lot colder this upcoming weekend. So let's highlight those early start games on Sunday, and you can see that yellow over Carolina. Yeah, that's some soaking rain. So if you do have any players in that game, plan on some wet ball and probably a lot of running action. Another spot, we're going to keep an eye on some scattered showers in Tennessee and also for the Cleveland-Chicago game. Green Bay looking dry but cool. Dry as well in New England with that wind and mid-70s for Miami. Only one game later Sunday afternoon into the evening, 45 degrees with most of the rain south of Buffalo. And then a dry game on Sunday night. Jacksonville playing Baltimore with low 60s. Then your Monday night game, Seattle and Philadelphia up in western Washington. Seattle area looking at some showers, no surprise there with mid-40s. That is your Week 15 GOATcast.
Thank you, Sam and Jason. As we're gearing up to go to the break, we're also gearing up to learn about GOAT lineup. And let's just say it's time for Sean Stellato to just beat me up in that alley. He's got to take me out because I think it's over. We're going to be getting into that in a second. Stick around. Well, Jason, they say it's not over till the fat lady sings, and the fat lady is officially singing. I don't think it's possible for me to come back 9-5, 5-9. I lost. I was operating based off fear. You remember when in Goodfellas, when Joe Pesci's character is like, "What, do I amuse you?"
Yeah,
to Henry Hill,
like a clown,
and he's like scared. He's terrified because he's not sure if he's joking or if he's serious.
Right.
That's how I've been the past few weeks. It's been bad, but it's over. I'm scared.
You had a good lineup. On paper, it was better than mine, but my guys, they outperformed themselves.
36 points I scored. Hurts, Mixon, Chase, Laporta. If they're not going to get it done, what can I say?
I mean, I had Browning, I had Cook, I had Lamb, and Taysom Hill didn't even play. I had him, and I had 62 points. This is going to be a fun one, though. I love you came up with. You're playing all San Francisco.
Yeah, I'm Kyle Shanahan.
Okay.
I'm playing Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, all against Arizona. What about you?
Well, because you're doing that, I played all Philly. Your team, Hurts, Swift, Smith, and Goddard. We'll see which team is better.
It doesn't even matter anymore. Good luck this week in Fantasy Playoffs. We'll see you next time.